But Gary, why don't you start us out? And we're talking about sort of the next wave of tech. What could be expected, particularly from a leadership perspective? What are we looking for in characteristics? You do a lot of investing. What kind of things are you looking for when you try to hire the team to lead these techs? How big a role is the team versus in terms of their personal skills versus the technical skills? Maybe you can go into a few of those things.
Sure. Well, so right now, I am the CIO for IPC, IPC.org. It is a trade association, global, and we serve the electronics industry. So all sorts of companies that deal with hardware in the electronics industry. So, you know, you don't think of Google and Tesla and Uber and some of those companies as being in the tech industry where they would actually buy or build printed circuit boards, but they do, and because of some of the business that they're in. So it's everybody from there down to, you know, global suppliers. We've got 135,000 company members and about 800,000 individuals. We do certification standards and whatnot. I also serve as the CTO. These are half-time jobs. And I serve as the CTO for Fin Results, which is another remote company. Both these companies have been remote. So when everybody sent their workers home in March, we didn't see any difference. So I've been doing remote, working with remote teams for quite a while. I also am a partner in GPS for Leaders, GPS4leaders.com. And that we've done always remotely. And I do, like I said, the show remotely. And I also was involved in starting Baker's Dozen, a career networking site, which Amy is familiar with. We have about 600 members, and we do that remotely. So to hire people, we've been hiring people for quite some time. We just hired 3 more Drupal developers for IPC in the last month and a half. And we look for people that have worked remotely, and we look for the best talent, and we can pick up the best talent, people that for one reason or another want to work remotely. And we picked up the Drupal developers. One's in Illinois, one's in North Carolina, and the other one's in Massachusetts, outside of Boston. So to get them working together, you know, to entice them, obviously there's flexible working schedules, but just the way that we go about organizing the work, we always start our meetings, our Zoom meetings, and we use Zoom on all of these. We've all picked Zoom as our collaboration site. We do the telephone, all of our telephones are through Zoom. We use it very collaboratively, along with Jira on the development side, and GitLab. We also use a little bit in one of the companies. So, but the idea is we always start meetings like we did with this meeting, a little banter, trying to get to know people. We always put up challenges. So sometimes we talk about weather because we're all over the place and everybody has different weather. So that's interesting. But we also talk about, we have a wacky, what we call Fun Shirt Friday. So we do that. We have put out different challenges. Who can put up the best virtual background, for instance? You'll see that my background isn't virtual. And a lot of people had thought it was, but if you can see this, I'm standing in the, the marina. So that brings up a lot of conversation around what's going on here in the marina. And we do that with a lot of people. People find different places to have not a virtual background, but they'll use their phone with Zoom and go outside or wherever they happen to be. If they're vacationing before the virus, they would show us what their background was and what they were seeing. So I can stop there, let other people talk, but I can answer questions around, some of the other aspects that.
Well, let me just ask you one quick question, Jerry, before you get off. And you've been doing this for many, many years. So past, present, what's the future look like?
So For the companies I'm working with now, I think we're going to see more and more. Well, within results, we go in and we help mid-sized banks, and I can go into that if you're interested. But we think that there's going to be a lot more receptivity to having us work off-site, as opposed to previously they wanted us to travel. I see a lot less travel. Obviously, I don't want to travel if I don't have to. When I was director of IT transformations at Alex Partners, I would travel to the West Coast for 10 months. Or my longest commute was Shanghai. I hope never to do that again. Next time I go to Shanghai, I want to do it on a boat. So I see a lot less travel. I think we're going to see um, people having a better work-life balance because you're going to spend less time in the car, even commuting to the office. What we tell people is, we'll give you back half of that commute time. Can you give us half of that commute time? They typically want to even say, look, I normally leave at 7. I'm going to start work at 7, right? Even if they don't get to the office till 8 or 8:30. And so I see maybe a little more productivity that happens from our groups at least. Uh, but their work-life balance is a lot better because if they want to go to a dentist appointment during the day, it's easy for them to go to the dentist or doctor's appointment or to pick up the kids at school. And we work around their schedule. We say, all right, you want to give us a few extra hours? That's cool. We'll take and make that very flexible for you. So I think you're going to see people have a way better work-life balance in the future. I don't would not want to be in. There was a time when I invested in commercial and office real estate as well as multifamily residential. That won't change, I don't think, except maybe it will change from the standpoint that there may be specialized work areas at home or in apartments, but would hate to be in office and commercial right now, real estate, because I think that's going to change substantially. Because I don't think everybody's going to go back. I know of a number of companies. They told people, look, come in, and they scheduled times when they could come in, and they came in, they picked up their computers, they picked up their office chair, and they took it all home. And those aren't going to go back. I'm also director at University Bank. We have 490 employees, and we've got about 400 employees that aren't ever going to go back to the office. So that's a substantial change.
So that's the next big disruptor here. And what about in technology? What are you seeing as disruptors there?
Well, I think Zoom's going to fit well. They already have fixed the majority of their problems, and it's really put a lot of pressure on Microsoft Teams and WebEx. I do a number of things with Cisco, GPS for Leaders. Cisco paid to put GPS for Leaders into their WebEx Teams platform, and so we work with them. But I think everybody has seen a dramatic increase in their usage. Zoom will they've fixed now everything except their end-to-end encryption. And that they bought a company, they're going to be integrating that technology in the next few months. So I see those getting better and better. And, we're on a Zoom call now and the video and the audio is pretty darn good. Every once in a while, you'll see somebody that'll have a problem, with the last mile still, but that's got to get fixed. And so I see the way that we work is just going to get better and better. The hard part is going to continue to be developing good relationships. I think what you're going to see is a lot of those kind of annoying behaviors when you go to the office and somebody would do something that's pretty annoying. Those are going to go away, replaced by other problems that we have to solve, which is, communication is going to get a lot better. Setting expectations has to get better within a team. Because we are remote, we're not going to have a chance to stop by somebody's desk. But again, we use virtual communication really well. At any one time, I'll look and I'll see that there's, 3/4 of the team is on a call, and I know there's no meeting set up. So these people are talking to each other. I can't tell who they're talking to, just that they're busy. And, I put in a little request that when you're not busy, give me a call, or when you're not busy, and we do that all over Zoom calls right now. So I see that changing pretty dramatically. Those annoying behaviors that people have won't show up like they do when they're in the office.
Right. Well, thank you very much. And you could follow the chat to see if there's any questions there for you. But we're going to move to somebody you've known for a few years, and that's Amy Sell. Good morning, Amy. So you don't look like you're in as a glamorous place as Gary.
No. And I fell for the background. I really thought, it was like, wow, what a great background. And then he did the 360 thing. I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
And then at first I thought he was so technologically savvy that maybe he had developed an app that would allow something like that. But he convinced me that he's in an amazing place doing some really neat things, like always. So
Amy,
great.
I know you since your days with at Spark with Rick Snyder, and you see a picture of Rick Snyder lately?
With the beard or what?
Beard, and his
Yeah.
hair is like curling down his back. He looks like a hippie. I have to say it.
Yeah.
So Amy, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're up to now, and then also maybe you could start commenting on what you're looking for in terms of leadership in the tech world.
Oh, sure. So so great to see so many great people who have known me. I mean, Gary, as he mentioned earlier, has known me since I was 3. But I think my dad has him beat. So great to see my dad, Cliff Sheldon, as always, any excuse. So in terms of the tech, so many folks know I worked at Ann Arbor Spark and then MEDC, and now have a consulting firm where I help do a lot of recruiting and matchmaking. So when I love talking about the tech industry and what skills are needed there. I think with leadership, when you're looking at leaders, I think a lot of the things that are important include, being that visionary. A lot of companies right now are making pivots. Some of our clients are taking advantage of kind of the new abnormal. I was just talking to a startup that is looking at developing, and my dad will love this because my mom sings in a choir, and there's tools out there that help band directors or orchestra directors or choir directors gather everybody kind of pre-records their part of a song and then they put it together. But there's a great guy, a new orchestra director out in Chelsea that is a recent U of M grad who has is partnering up with some software developers to help improve that experience. And so I was just talking with him the other day, and he's looking for people to help, join his startup, especially on the sales and marketing side. So, he has the vision, but is looking for other people, and he has the domain expertise, and he has people that are on the technical side. But when it comes to building relationships with schools and educational partners that might be interested in rolling out the technology, I mean, he has a pretty short window, because schools are going to be determining in the next 2 months what technology needs they have, if they are going to be in a remote school environment, an educational environment. So there's some really exciting, technologies out there that are reacting and trying to, maximize the quality of life that can go on in music and the arts and culture through these challenges. So entrepreneurs are always innovating, and it's great to be able to see how they do that. Other skills that I think important are like project management skills. So once you have the vision, being able to kind of execute on that plan, very, very important. And depending on what else is needed on the team, that can be critical. It's always important, and we see this now more than ever around people management skills. So can you attract, retain, and develop your workforce? Can you meet their needs? And with the remote environment, which I completely agree with Gary, is likely to continue on, having adept people managers who are good at the communication and the conflict management and being able to be intentional with culture, I think is even more important with remote. There's a lot of opportunities that are going to present themselves, but I think, things can get out of whack pretty easily when you don't have that immediate body language, when you aren't able to have some of those more informal conversations to be able to say, hey, something isn't feeling right, what's going on? So, finding people manager, that skill set, I think is going to continue to be important. And along with that goes, communication and team building. Another key thing is around decision making. Some of the issues that I've seen with leaders that aren't effective is their inability to make decisions. And in the current environment where you need to pivot quickly, make key decisions that could save your business quickly, depending on the market, being able to be decisive as a leader is important. And then there's another group of skills that I would put in a category that are very particular to startups and technology. And I loved this acronym that I heard a couple of years ago. It's called FITFO. It's the ability to figure it the heck out. I'll let you fill in the heck. But it's for people that really, in a startup environment where there's a lot of ambiguity, you need to change quickly, you need to wear a lot of hats. Often, you're coming into a situation, you need to solve that problem without being able to look at the playbook of, well, what did they do last year? And what's the template? And what's the plan for this? But people really need to figure it out on the fly. So that ability to be adaptable, deal with ambiguity as well is so important with some of the tech startups that I've been working with. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Rob.
Okay, very good. We have on the phone Laura Cowan. Lauren is out in the boonies without access to the internet, and that's one of the challenges I guess we have from making this accessible to everybody right now. There's a couple populations that are struggling to keep up, and we have to be really careful about not accelerating the divide between the rich and the poor in the country, but alleviating it. And I think that's going to be a challenge as we move to remote places. I know some of my students at U of M struggle when they go back home because they don't really have a place to study. It's crowded in their apartments, or they don't have access to the internet. So we really take some things for granted as white middle class, well-to-do, folks in terms of what's available. But Laura, you're out there?
Good morning. Yes, I'm here. Sorry to make you nervous. I'm here.
Okay. Laura, can you just introduce yourself and your publication and tell us kind of what you see for the coming through your news channels?
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, it's ironic. I have an unreliable Zoom connection only because I'm actually in a fairly well-to-do area near Ann Arbor, but we all have a lot of acreage, and so cable won't run internet lines out here. It's not efficient enough. So we have our special arrangement for neighborhood internet, but now that everybody's working remotely, my connection is unreliable, where normally working remotely as a journalist, this is pretty ideal. So it's a little bit unexpected. I was supposed to be on somebody's podcast the other day and it just kept dropping me, but phone is fine. So what I am seeing from the boondocks out here, I am the co-founder and executive editor of Chronicle Press. It's a newer tech blog based in Ann Arbor. We cover Midwest tech news and startup news, best practices in the Great Lakes region, and we are expanding to cover more of the industries that are rooted here in tech, such as health tech, software, security, things like that. So what I am seeing in my interviews with companies lately is that a lot of the bigger companies are mostly looking at how to do rebranding initiatives to address coronavirus. They all have projects where they're trying to help the community, where smaller tech companies are looking for funding, hitting pause, just kind of negotiating the uncertainty because they might not have the same amount of funding. So my concern right now is that I think a lot of companies are going to be okay, but as you say, Dr. Rob, I think that we're seeing an increasing split between rich and poor individuals and access through remote education, remote work. The same thing is seeming to be true of companies, where the big ones have more resources to kind of weather the storm. On the other side, I will say that small companies are quite nimble at filling in the gaps. So for example, we were talking at the beginning of the call about Zoom and their end-to-end encryption problems. I just spoke with a company from Ontario last week called Toria that we'll be featuring this week on the blog that basically saw that issue, which is also a privacy issue in terms of HIPAA compliance, things like that. Like you can't be a doctor, for example, and record people's calls in a system that's not secure. So anyway, this tech startup from Ontario basically started from the ground up and created a suite of telework products that meets that need, probably faster than Zoom can do it. I don't think that's going to cut into Zoom's market share at this point, given how much they've accelerated, but we're seeing a lot of smaller tech startups see the opportunities out there and really address needs that larger companies would take a longer time to address.
And what are you seeing in terms of the leaders that impress you? Laura, you deal a lot interviewing people individually. What characteristics are you seeing that really impress you in terms of people who are able to lead tech at this time, 2020?
Oh, okay. That's a great question. I would say it's the people that have the best people management skills. We also touched on work-life balance earlier, and I think given the uncertainty around how long the pandemic is going to go on and how much it's going to affect people's families in different ways, the best leaders that have impressed me the most anyway are the ones that are the most flexible with people's work-life balance, with people's ability to, for example, like what I'm doing right now, to log in to calls via different means, because people have different circumstances going on and are juggling quite a bit. I'm in a pretty good spot here, but I'm one of those people that's like remote schooling a kid and trying to juggle a couple of businesses. And so the tech leaders that understand that and are thinking about the long haul and how to help their employees find real balance and real wellness are the ones that are getting rewarded with gratitude. I suspect better productivity, though I'd have to look at the data there, because their employees are not faced with burnout, basically.
Okay, interesting. I think embedded in all this is the ability to communicate well, because Zoom really does not do well for somebody who's long-winded or somebody who doesn't express themselves well, in a very clear, concise way. So again, we're seeing communication skills and as you say, interpersonal skills being very important, and that's what led Mike Anleitner and I to work on the book that we just finished, which is called Tech Leadership 4.0. So Mike, I'm going to bring you in here. And is that a real view, or is that a backdrop, Mike?
Well, that's actually a backdrop from the Upper Peninsula.
Okay.
It's the lift bridge between Houghton and Hancock in the Keweenaw Peninsula, which is one of my favorite places in the entire state of Michigan to visit in the summer, not in the winter, when there's 250 to 300 inches of snow falling. So in my youth, I loved it, but not anymore. So and right now go ahead, Gary.
I was going to say the record annual snowfall in the Keweenaw Peninsula is 33 feet, 10.5 inches.
Yeah,
as you may know. So
yeah, 369 inches or something like that. Yes.
That's amazing.
Yes.
Not a lot of yachts up there, in other words.
No. Well, Lake Superior is Lake Superior is quite dangerous even in the summer. Yeah. It's a very it's a place not for the inexperienced to go out on the water at all. So it's a very unusual place in that regard. But right now I'm in northern Michigan, about 50 miles south of the Mackinac Bridge, in my summer home, where I spend summers and spend winters in Dallas-Fort Worth. So I'm involved with training and consulting work for manufacturing businesses. I've spent almost 50 years working in manufacturing, both in the factory and in the product development area, distribution, shipping, packaging, okay, all different aspects of making physical things. And, Rob and I have been working on this book off and on for almost 10 years. And the current set of events sort of crystallized our opportunity to work together and finalize it. But it's really, the book is called Tech Leadership 4.0, and it's about the way leadership is changing as the fourth wave of the Industrial Revolution moves forward. And the pandemic, of course, is complicating that even further. And some of the things that we see on that is things that Gary, Amy, and Laura have all touched on. The importance of relationships in managing a business, but particularly for technical people, people with high technical skills. They need to keep in mind the necessity to balance task and relationship. People in the tech world tend to be very task focused. Engineers tend to be very much get it done, get it done, get it done. It's a technical thing. I need to do that. And relationships are secondary. That's increasingly becoming a bad approach. And we're seeing tech leaders who struggle with that. We could name some that I think have that problem. In major corporations right now, we've seen it. Learning to balance those two things is critical. And so this whole idea of the fourth wave of the Industrial Revolution, where the Internet of Things is going to become powerful, robotics are growing by leaps and bounds. Probably most of you have seen the Boston Dynamics dog robot, the robot dog that is actually being used in malls and other places right now. This all is coming to a head very quickly, and it's changing the landscape in a huge way. And we toss in the periodic crises of financial collapses and pandemics, and you're going to see these discontinuous changes in the world of commerce that revolves around technical aspects. And one of the quotes we have in the book, I think, is quite relevant at this point. It's from David Lloyd George, who was the Prime Minister of Great Britain during World War I. He says, "You can't cross a chasm in small steps." You don't get across, you have to take a big leap. And the problem is that increases your risk dramatically. And this whole idea that you can do things by yourself, which many engineers still have that naive view, isn't true. It hasn't been true for a long time, but it's increasingly completely absurd to even think you can in most cases. So that means you have to work with people. And the environment we're in right now, as we look across the screen and see us all connected in different ways, that's going to become a new skill as well. But again, it's all going to rest on relationships, which Amy talked about, body language and things like that. I've had the opportunity to do some video conferencing with high def stuff, and that does help, but it's still not the same as being there. And the last part, particularly for me, is we're not going to be able to build things remotely in factories, at least not for a generation or two. And that means we have to get people back together again. And it's going to create some tremendous problems for managers who are used to, in many cases, a place like an auto plant. Well, it's not the brutal place it was when I was a young man. It was brutal in those days. I mean, it was I remember my third day at Wayne Assembly Plant in Wayne, Michigan. And I'm working at my job, and some guy wanders over from the tool room, which was a skilled trade area, sort of the elite of the factory workers. And he said, "Hey, kid, you're working pretty hard." I said, "Just trying to do my job, man." He says, "You keep working that hard, you're going to have an accident in the parking lot sometime." Okay. I was being educated in the culture that existed in those plants at that time, and that culture is not totally gone. It's still a very high pressure area. It's not what it used to be, of course, but this whole idea of how you treat people is going to be more and more significant. And that's really what we're trying to deal with in the book, is trying to put these pieces together and see how leadership techniques have to be applied in this context of massive change. And one of the things I think that really comes into play with this is this idea of how your culture matches your set of rules in an organization. Gary, you're talking about all the people working remotely, for example. You've got to have some rules to govern that, or it's total anarchy. At the same time, every business has a culture of some type. And that culture can either be very supportive or it can be very coercive. Now, a lot of young tech companies are both supportive and have a minimum of rules. That works for a while until you reach a certain scale. After you reach a certain scale, you cannot go without rules. You have to start putting rules in place. Sometimes those small companies are also very, what I'll call, autocratic. They don't have rules, but they have a strong leader who just tells everybody what to do. Again, that doesn't scale. As you move up in scale, the need for rules increases. Now, at this point, you have a real choice. Do rules become supportive, or do they become coercive? And that's something that, again, many tech people have trouble with, because they are notorious micromanagers. They love to go after the details. They love to go after every little bit and have everything done as well as they would do it themselves. They're not going to be able to do that. If you move into the area where you have a coercive culture with rules, you're in bureaucratic hell. It's a terrible place to work, and people quit and go, and the business will eventually suffer for it. On the other hand, if you decide to not have rules, you'll be in terrible trouble too. That requires you to have a dynamic balance, a balance that changes minute to minute, day by day, with who you're working with and what you're doing, between getting the job done and how you interact with people. And you don't want to just sit around the campfire singing Kumbaya. Particularly in a factory environment, you got work to do. You've got to get things done. There's an incredible metric or rhythm to operating a manufacturing business. It can't wait. And if you become coercive, you're going to have more and more trouble. And in particular, the social interaction that has been so critical in factories, getting right down in people's faces on a regular basis. We've already seen it. I think when Ford tried to reopen their assembly plants, I think 3 of them closed within 3 days due to infections, to COVID-19 infections. It's going to be a challenge, and it's going to really rely on us building more trust. It's going to rely on us exerting more and more leadership. And as the levels of communication get better and better and better, you know, I remember seeing a fax machine for the first time. I started engineering education with a slide rule. It's almost like being a time traveler to be where we're at today, to going fast forward into the future. That pace is going to accelerate, and the need for interpersonal skills while maintaining your focus on task accomplishment is not going to change. And Rob and I try in the book to go through a lot of that and explain to, particularly with a focus towards people who are technologists, how to do that, how to develop those skills. And we actually have some self-directed exercise to aid in that. So that's sort of the kind of thing I'd like to plant in people's head, is this need to keep this work relationship balance in place, and to make sure you understand that the balance between rules and your culture are really critical.
Thanks,
Rob?
Mike. I'm going to open it up now to the panel to talk to one another in response to what you've heard. Gary, comments from, let's start with Gary. Do you have any comments from what you've heard from the other three, Gary?
You know, just that I absolutely agree, especially the way Michael was describing the environment, that for a remote workforce, you know, we need, and what we do is we create self-organizing teams. So you might have a team that does this led by one person, and a team that does that led by other people. Many times I fall in line as one of the followers of an initiative that's led by one of the people that technically report to me. We look for people that know how to ask for help. Too often, if you're remotely working, there's nobody really to quickly ask a question of. So we create situations where we do expect them and want them and ask for them to ask for help when they need it. We look for people that have, you know, that really excel under low touch management style, because you can't manage the way, you know, you used to when you were micromanaging. So we need self-starters, people that work well independently. But you know, communication becomes so important. We have to clearly talk about the and explain the company's vision, mission, and value, especially bringing new people on, and then communicate the purpose of what they're doing. Sometimes people get lost when they're working remotely, and it's harder for them to fall in line and follow somebody. We have to set clear expectations, and we establish standard operating procedures that are very high level. We created ADAM for IPC, which stands for Agile Development Approach Methodology. And it's really just an approach. We have rules to break rules, because it's hard for people to say, you know, I can't follow that particular rule. Well, then all you have to do in order to want to break that rule, you have to make things big and visible, because it's not going to be visible when you're working remotely if not. So as long as you do that, you know, there are, like I said, rules to break rules. We do pairing a lot. We do a lot of online training, lunch and learns. The training that we do is for, you know, one person on the team to, or a couple people on the team to the rest of the team. And then we use, you know, guiding principles for the team based on good servant leadership. To Michael's point, leadership is changing. And I could go into a number of different things that we do. Rob, you know this a little bit. We use personality tests to help people learn about each other, strengths, weaknesses, how to work together, how to get along, kind of what GPS for Leaders is based on. But we've used a combination of Eagle Center for Leadership is kind of interesting, but we use social styles, competing values. A number of us have either, Rob teaches at Ross, a number of us have gone through MBA programs or BBA programs there at Ross. They use competing values, which is built in, again, to GPS for Leaders, but Myers-Briggs, DISC, 16 personalities. Those are good ways to get people to understand who each other, you know, the strengths and weaknesses of all the different members of the team.
To comment on that, I think the understanding is one level. Where I see people struggling is managing their emotions. We don't test out. They might tell us how we tend to manage our emotions, but we don't really get the opportunity to practice that. And I'm seeing right now with the COVID, a lot of anxiety, and this is leading to a lot of anger. A lot of people, these outbursts that they don't even understand in themselves where it's coming from. They're upset about, you know, who moved my cheese kind of thing. And the other day I had an argument with my wife over who moved my stuff, you know, and it's kind of like, well, why am I getting all worked up about this? Well, because, you know, we've got my son and his family are here, and we've had Pat's 98-year-old mother here, and you know, the world has changed dramatically in a few weeks, a few months to make it very difficult to just go day to day. So that managing emotions is really powerful. And by the way, I have a course online now through LinkedIn called 90 Days to Better Self-Awareness. And anybody that's interested in that, please let me know if you are. There's a few people online that are participating in a Thursday seminar where we go through a series of exercises, and we've been focusing on learning how to manage yourself. And that's a key thing in the workplace. Amy, comments in terms of what do you see? How well are people being educated to work in this world?
Yeah, a few comments. One neat little thing. So, Mike, I was the night labor rep at Wayne Assembly at one time. What was called Michigan Truck Plant.
Oh no, I was over on the other side, the little car part. The truck plant I heard was even worse at times.
Yeah. I called the police 3 times in a week one time. That was exciting, but bringing back lots of memories there. And really agree with the approach. I mean, I think that need for leaders and managers to balance the people side and getting work done. And a lot of what I see is people are good at one. They have a natural tendency towards one, but the other area they need to develop more fully. So I think the tools that you all have discussed and described will be really beneficial for people as they're, you know, working with their own teams and developing. So,
well, Amy, I had a question for you. You talked about being involved in staffing and things like that these days.
Yep.
How do you go about selecting people in this new environment? How do you go about evaluating them? You don't get to live with them or, you know, work with them for days. So how do you go about doing that in a way that's most constructive?
Yeah, great question. So I kind of view it as a puzzle, and as I'm trying to work with my clients to understand who's going to be a good fit, you know, there's lots of different pieces that help you put together that puzzle to see if they are going to be a good fit. So, you know, using tools like, you know, obviously there's the resume, there's the LinkedIn profile, there's the phone interviews or the video Zoom interviews, or taking somebody out to lunch and seeing how they used to treat the server, but now the robot person who's delivering the food in the future. So there's, you know, putting people in assessment. I love assessments. If you can recreate and see that work product, I think that's great. I think tools like Myers-Briggs or DISC or Caliper or Predictive Index can be valuable if people really understand the tools and limitations of them and view them as a piece of the puzzle, not the whole, whole thing. Right. I get a little bit nervous there. I usually have my clients work up the job description and identify what are those, 3 to 5 must-haves instead of a long list of 20 things, and then figuring out how you're really going to get at those pieces, whether it's the assessment tools that I mentioned or the reference checks or background checks, or again, seeing that work product. But so I can speak for hours, happy to follow up with anybody offline about my view on assessing so that you can look for the fit, and really making sure that what you offer as an employer matches someone's natural tendencies, skills, and abilities. So but I love the topic, and I think all these pieces can fit into it nicely.
Laura, any comments from your end about what you're seeing? Or questions? You're the good question asker. Do you have any questions to ask?
Do you have any questions to ask? Yeah. So, Amy, this is what I have been mulling over for a while now. You might be a great person to answer this question. I interview a lot of people who are managing a remote workforce all of a sudden, and I think from my perspective that it's great that people don't realize how many skills they're developing for managing themselves in a short period of time due to the pandemic. But I've been curious what people like yourself see in terms of trends where, coming out of the pandemic or managing, going through it, depending on how long it takes, do you think that people will start choosing remote work versus in-office work based on their own personality and preference for managing output versus schedule, or working more alone versus being in an office? Or what kind of trends are you seeing there in terms of how that's shifting in hiring or in people accepting new positions?
Whew. Another great question. Gosh, and how to keep it concise. There's definitely going to be shifts, as everybody's mentioned. There's been some surveys that have been done, and I've been reading about, where I think lots of people, whether it's 1/3 to 72% of the folks, want to move back into an office environment and want the structure. I think there's a lot of burnout right now because of the homeschooling, dealing with families. I mean, this is definitely an unusual situation that is putting more stress on the people that are staying at home. But I think there's also, organizations have been able to run experiments over the last 2 months that they never would have done. And there's going to be some key learnings that they can take out of these experiments and move them forward. So I do see increased flexibility. I do see increased use of technology. There's lots of studies out there that say, brainstorming and decision-making can be enhanced when it's on a level playing field, as opposed to, being in a conference room looking at what the boss is going to say and then just agreeing. Instead you can use ways to, get more information into the pool of knowledge and make better decisions in ways. So there's some really best practices that you can latch onto. But I still think that, and some employers are more naturally adept at this. I mean, if you managed by objectives and by looking at output instead of looking at face time and needing to have somebody see what they're doing to trust that they're actually doing it. I mean, I think those managers are going to be struggling, and the people that work for those managers are going to be struggling. People's motivations, sometimes they're very intrinsically motivated and good at planning and organizing and have that initiative, and they're just thriving in this environment. Other people that might be extroverts and might need that extra social support to feel rewarded and recognized in their work, it's going to be more of a struggle. So I think there's, so I can talk about, I've been thinking about this stuff a lot over the last 2 months. So in brief, I mean, lots of good things to take away. But there's a lot of conflicting priorities and values and management practices and employee needs that still need to be sorted out. And I think it's going to be done on a case-by-case basis. But great, thanks.
I'd add one thing to that too, and this gets us into, again, what the fourth revolution is all about, is that we're moving from a place where we control things systemically. Now we have to control them adaptively. You have to change all the time, because one of the things I saw, Amy, working the last 10 years I worked in Dallas for a very successful company, extremely successful. They were a company that's 120 years old, and they had an increase in sales of over 300% during that time frame, which you don't see with old line companies. But at a certain point, it became a tyranny of objective. Okay, management by objective became so entrenched and so focused on a very narrow number of measures that many things that would have benefited the business even more were either passed by or deliberately stifled because they weren't attuned to the small number of metrics the CEO focused on. Now, those metrics led us to great success, but again, being adaptive is critical. And if you are straightforward and bull ahead, you are again letting task overtake relationship at times. So I agree with you in general, but I will add that as a caution.
That's a great point.
I'm going to ask Emily to, we have about 15 minutes or 18 minutes left till 9:15 where I hope to wrap this up, but I want to give people a few minutes to have a chance to talk to one another. So I'm going to ask Emily to shift us to small groups. Emily, how many are going to be in a small group?
You can do 3 or it doesn't matter. I can put as many.
Let's do 3 for right now, so just in terms of time's sake, and we'll just do maybe 5 minutes or so of small groups just to introduce and have a chance to come up with a couple of questions. And this is Leadership Connect, so I do want to not lose the connect part of it. But we'll do that, and then we'll come back. Hopefully some of you can stay online till 9:15, and then we could wrap up at that point. So I'm going to, in a few minutes, you'll be taken away to a small room, and we'll all be on Gary's boat somewhere in the Atlantic. So just tell them what your destination is and enjoy the next 5 minutes of at sea. All right, looks like we're coming back on board. I'm going to call Haley Mullins. Are you out there? Haley, can you unmute yourself?
Yep. Hey, I'm here.
Haley's a couple of years out of graduate school, and she's been working remotely for quite a while. So Haley, how is all this? What do you have to see about the future of tech as you're in the early stages of your career?
Yeah, definitely. So in our group, we kind of discussed 2 main things. I think for me, one of the things that's really interesting to look at from a consulting perspective is understanding that companies are definitely cutting back on travel. I think we're seeing a lot of saved costs on travel, but also what we're seeing, especially working in healthcare consulting, is our clients not wanting us to come on site. So I think what we're really contending with is how is this going to look in the future from like a sales perspective or just a consulting perspective in terms of actually going on site with our clients. And I think we're also seeing what's missing there in terms of that human interaction. I think there's a way to compensate. There's ways to still have that sort of interaction remotely and virtually, but there's still a piece that's missing by not having that face-to-face interaction. And then the other thing that we discussed, which I think we kind of want to throw back to the panel or to everyone else, is what changes do we see persisting after this goes away, after everything's under control and things go back? Like, what's the new normal? So what do we see? Do we see these virtual meetings still happening? Do we see this expectation for video on virtual meetings? I think that's a new thing for a lot of us. So we're just kind of curious what people think is going to really persist.
Well, let me throw that back to the panel. What reactions do y'all have? Anybody want to take that one?
Well, that's certainly a problem that I'm facing in my business, Rob, to be honest with you. Our business model was based on face-to-face on-site work. And that's not a reality now. And some of the things that we're just not going to be able to do some of these things remotely. You're not going to be able to get close to machinery. You're not going to be able to get close to a factory with current video technology well enough to do it. And right now I'm still working on it. I don't know the good answer to that, but there's some of that's going to be necessary, and how we're going to manage that is not totally in our control.
Gary, how about yourself for your booking your boat business? Do you see that? Is it going to be a challenge for people to be willing to fly to Florida and book onto an environment that they're with other people? How do you see that playing out for you?
Yeah, we've changed our marketing. First of all, we're not doing much right now. Our next charter is not till the 26th. and that's a week long up in over in Bimini in the Bahamas. But two things: we think that people will not want to fly, so we're marketing closer to home, Florida and a couple of joining states, and we also believe that they won't get on a big cruise ship, but they'll get on, another cruise ship where there's 6 other people, like ours. So it's it's good in one respect and not so good in a couple others.
Yeah. I could see where people are going to want to go with people who they feel safe, like with family, so it's probably going to be a real opportunity for marketing. Amy and Laura, I had a question for you in terms of the linking between the educational system and the work system, because it seems that there's going to be an increasingly a big gap between how people are educated and what is required of them in the work setting. How do you see that playing out now?
Well, this is Laura here. I think Amy had to jump on another meeting, unfortunately. Okay. I have been a little bit concerned as someone who watches technology and is also remote schooling a child about the disparities between different school districts being able to offer virtual education that keeps up with curriculum. We had switched school districts a few years ago, and so I'm still in touch with a lot of people in both. And there's just an enormous difference, even in the culture and the attitude of the parents about helping their kids stay on track. So for example, we're in Ann Arbor, and they seem to be doing a pretty amazing job. They make sure that kids have any kind of laptop or iPad that they need. They're offering internet hotspots. They're keeping up with hot lunch to feed kids. And the school that we were at even took private donations to help families who had job losses. So you're seeing a lot of earlier public schools, probably private as well, acting as community support centers. But you can imagine that that takes an enormous toll on the system, and that school systems that don't have the same tax base can't keep up with that. And then the previous school district we were in, which was more rural, pretty good school system, but the attitude of a lot of the parents was, I can't manage my job plus educating my child, so I'm just not going to. And so the teachers are going to have to figure this out. Otherwise, I'm pulling my kid, or they're just going to hang out at home until we get back to normal face-to-face instruction. And unfortunately, the kids are the ones that get left behind there, because school is pretty fast-moving these days. So I think universities have an easier time adopting technology for remote instruction, because there's a lot of self-management among students anyway in how they do the work and what they're learning and what their job is. I think you're going to see a lot of unfortunate disparities in earlier education, especially in disadvantaged communities, that I'm really hoping something like Khan Academy could help with, we kind of fill the gap. But if people don't have access to remote technology for normal schooling, they probably don't have access to those resources to catch up and fill the gap either.
Yeah, so I think this is going to be a really important partnership that has to happen, is a better partnership between the workforce and corporations, organizations, and the schools. I mean, we are much more interdependent than we used to be. I have a personal experience of that right now, because my son, who's mid-40s and is an editor at the New York Times, and his wife, who is working in an international consulting firm in the sustainability and energy fields, are here because they're post-COVID. They both had COVID earlier, about 2 months ago now, and they're now have the antibodies, but they've come here because they need so much help with their 3 and 6 year olds. So the 3 and 6 year olds, they're totally exhausting me just trying to educate them, because they're supposed to be online with their schools. And I could see some smiles out there from the parents, but it's really unsustainable to think that parents can have a job and work. So here we are, 4 adults, and my wife is a preschool expert, and I'm pretty good at teaching,
Right.
but we all are really struggling to keep up with these kids and keep them educated. And this is in the summer when they can run around. Imagine what it's like in the winter where they're stuck at home. So
right. I don't think it's unreasonable for parents to say, I cannot manage this, right? I think that's one of the keys right now is people knowing, like you said, you got into a who moved my cheese argument. Like, that's pretty common right now. We're like, whoa, okay, I'm at the edge and I didn't realize it until just one more thing happened and I couldn't do it. One of my concerns right now is that people who are hiring managers or something will think that this is what remote work consists of normally, and it isn't at all. This is like a global crisis that's just unfolding. And so as someone who's worked remotely for quite a long time, I'm looking forward to the new normal in terms of, can address Haley's question, new normal in terms of people finding what works and what actually is normal. Because in our case, personally, I can say our teachers found technology that helped them connect with kids directly. And then they could just say, hey, parents, if you want to check in, here's how to do it. And I was like, oh, thank God, because I don't even have the hours in the day to like look over my kid's shoulder and teach her algebra, right?
Yeah. You've got I believe you have a husband. I mean, so you're not a single parent. I mean, and it's still very
right. I'm one of the lucky ones.
Right. Mike, I'm gonna let you.
I'm gonna ask one quick question,
Mike
Rob.
Anleitner, because Mike, you have a very good. Well, actually, we're just about out of time. I think I'm going to let Gary and Mike have the last word here. Mike, I'm going to let you talk about the your change formula. I find that's very interesting. We'll have Gary have the last word in terms of rolling us out here.
One of the things I discovered, I didn't invent this idea, but there are 3 things that make change in an organization possible. First of all, you have to recognize there's going to be resistance to change no matter what you do. And resistance is not inherently bad. People resist because they've got a reason to resist. But there are 3 things that need to be dealt with to overcome that resistance. And they're not tackling the resistance directly. There has to be a dissatisfaction with the status quo. You have to have a long-term vision of what the change will bring you, and you have to have a solid plan to start that change process. And the problem typically comes in if any one of those 3 things is non-existent, resistance wins every time. And I've played back this model throughout my entire professional career, even my personal life. I've never found an exception to it. And the problem we are going to face right now is that many people are actually not dissatisfied with the status quo, minus the virus. They're very happy, but change is going to be thrust upon you. And the virus is making us dissatisfied with the status quo. That's allowed us to change. But you could see very quickly, as soon as it got to the point where the change wasn't big enough anymore, everyone wanted to go back to the way we were. And we're starting to see the surges in infection rates again all over the country. And death rates are going up too in certain places. And this whole idea that you're comfortable with the way things are will prevent change. And if you're faced with that, the only way you can do it, unless the outside world places dissatisfaction in your face, is for you to try and educate people as to why they're dissatisfied. And people nowadays don't want to believe that. One of the things I heard a few years ago from a gentleman said, watching one of the news channels on TV, he says, will you change that to this other channel? He says, I want the lies I like, not the lies I don't like.
Okay. Oh, and
that's
Mike,
going to be something we're facing.
Mike, once again, our book is Tech Leadership 4.0. We're looking for 100 reviews of it. So if people would like a review copy, please contact me or Mike. You have my email and be happy to get your review copy to look at. We don't care whether it's positive or negative. Of course, we prefer one, but any review is good for Amazon. So that's how we publish the book. The softcover version will be available next week, right?
Well, paperback's available now. So as soon as I get some copies ordered and printed, we'll be there. But the ebook version is available right now for 99 cents on Kindle. And it's available, the Kindle reader's free to anyone who's never used it. It works fine. You go to Amazon and look for Tech Leadership 4.0, and you'll find an ebook for 99 cents. So if you'd like to get started, you can right now if you like ebooks.
Gary, you want to take us out here and lady final words on the topic?
Sure. I think Michael was a very good summary. I'll address something that that Laura mentioned, and the way we deal with it. we have one of our business owners, and we do agile development in a distributed team, which most of the time agile development is done on co-located, or in a co-located team, and so we've been practicing how we work together. We've integrated work life and home life. We have one business owner who was taking care of a niece, and you could hear the niece in the background, and we said, Amy, is that your niece? Yeah, oh yeah. We said, put her on. So she came up, got on the Zoom camera, and we said, how do you, what do you think of your Aunt Amy working like this? And you're talking to all of us, and she waved at us. We talked to her and said, okay, now we need to talk to your aunt if you could go play somewhere else. And she did, and we went on. And it was wonderful because it gave other people license to bring their personal life in, and we got to know each other because of that, maybe even better than if we had all been co-located in the same office. So that was one way to help make the team and each other a little more human rather than just talking head on a screen somewhere.
The same thing happened
and then
today, Gary. My granddaughter knocked on my door. Next thing I know, she was in my lap watching the Zoom cast in front of me.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect, right? We think that's wonderful. That's a great way to help humanize our relationships with members of the team. The only last thing that I'd have to say is, Michael, if you could get me a Kindle version of your book, and what are you doing this Saturday from 5 to 6?
From 5 to 6, I probably would be available.
I think you and Rob should come on our Internet Advisor radio show on WJR 760 AM.
I'd love to.
And talk about the book.
I'd love to. It'd be great. Thank you for the invitation.
I'll check my childcare schedule, Gary, but I'll try to do it. So.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you.
You don't mind having a 4-year-old on, right?
You know what? We'll do that on the radio too. We've had many times when we've asked people, when I was in the studio, we'd ask people to bring their kids or grandkids in, and we'd put them on the air. So we think that's just a great way, again, on the radio to humanize what we're doing. And, again, working on teams, we think it's a great way to get to know each other better.
We'll be back next Friday morning with a team of experts about leading in the biotech world, and we'll have a really great program on that. So we'll look forward to seeing you all next week. Be well, enjoy the weather, and see Mike Cole if you need some more money. See Dave Whittier if you need space to work and you don't have access. Hey, wait, there's a baby on board here. Who's that?
It's Roger.
Roger, that's just your new granddaughter.
That's the new granddaughter. She's about 3.5 weeks older, maybe.
Fantastic. Looks a lot
That's
like
the way all of us feel right now.
Yeah, I can see it. Very similar. Look, for sure. She's exploring right now ways to make the world better. I can see that. All right, take care, everybody.
All right. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.